The question was, if 71 passes, how would we compare to other states with regard to adding amendments to the Constitution through the citizen initiative process, right? Okay. There are only 18 states that allow for a citizen-initiated constitutional change. So we're still going to be able to do it, which puts us kind of in the middle of the pack. It'll be less challenging than, say, Florida, where they raised the threshold for passage to 60%. Arguably less challenging than Nevada, where you have to pass your constitutional measure at 2 consecutive elections. So you'd have to pass in 16 and in 18, or it wouldn't become a constitutional measure. But we'll be, and the signature gathering, the other states do a breakdown by county, which is like Arkansas has a breakdown by county. So it's hard to say. We'll probably still, we'll be harder, definitely, because right now we're the easiest. But still, with 32 states not allowing it at all, I'd characterize us as being somewhere in the middle. And when it comes to being somewhere in the middle, I mean, there's 3 different ways you can geographically do signature gathering requirements that are constitutional, that have been challenged and being proven to be constitutional. One is congressional districts, of which, of course, we have 7. 2 would be Senate districts, and 3 would be House districts. And we took the middle road on that one also. We wanted to force people to get into rural Colorado, but we didn't want to make it impossible. Anything else? Any questions for Jerry? Get some really hard ones. Mr. Holtorf. It's one of the worst ideas I've ever seen, frankly. A 10% tax on Social Security, 10% tax on tractor rental, 10% tax on the sale of your real estate. Anybody who could possibly, our speaker talked about people moving into the state if they had chronic illness and needed someone else to pay for their treatment. Think about this. Anybody who could possibly move out of the state would if they were an income earner. Guess who can't move out of the state? Richard, I can't think of a way you can pick up your ranch and move it to Nebraska. So you're going to be stuck here paying this tax. Maybe Jerry likes it, I don't know.
I believe you do know whether or not I like it, because I can't move my farm no easier than you can move your farm, quite frankly. I'm in the same boat, and I have talked to businesses. Let me start by saying I've talked to my doctor. My doctor in Sterling, the family doctor, said he will move to Sydney if this passes. He said there are a number of them that will move with him to surrounding towns and hope to have patients that still want to come see him. My concern is when doctors leave and lines get longer and people come from, when you offer something free, people are going to come here to take advantage of it. And you and I are going to continue to pay for that. And you and I are going to continue to pay for that. That's why I agree with Senator Brophy, and gosh sakes, we say that a lot to each other, but this is one of the dumbest ideas I've ever seen on our ballot.
Any other questions? Jeremy?
Now here's a political answer. The answer is yes, is that data? I don't know what it is. I do know, I don't have it at my fingertips. I have seen it. I do know that minimum wage was created as a starting point, as someplace, an entry level. For example, if I want to flip burgers at McDonald's while I'm working and try to move up in management and try to do other things and build my resume. That's what minimum wage was designed to do. Minimum wage was never designed to be somebody's full-time employment forever and ever and ever. It's to help people get started with some sort of basis. And the basis was set, actually the basis was raised back in 2006, where we passed another minimum wage increase in the Constitution, absolutely. Let me go back, now come back. Well, you would anticipate that one of the unintended consequences is that if I'm already making $15 an hour and the guy that just started is making minimum wage at $12, I'm going to go to my boss and say, look, I'm worth more than the $3 difference that we have here. I would anticipate mine going up. Now, as you may or may not know, the president just did an executive order that said that we are going to make employers pay overtime for salaried workers as well through executive order, not because he couldn't get it through the legislature or Congress, because he knew he couldn't. And so we'll see how that all pans out. But it's the same type of scenario. You create and raise that level on what people are going to get paid. Everybody else is going to have to go up as well, if that value of this lower worker, if all things remaining equal. So yes. Bonnie.
Well, I had heard that unions are the ones that are really funding this, and I need to be clarified if you can do this. I heard that there's some law in Colorado that union salaries are tied to the minimum wages. In other words, an example of someone making $40 an hour, union person, and minimum wage goes up, then their $40 would go up in relationship. Like this was $3, theirs would go up. Is that so?
The wages of union workers actually, I don't believe, are tied to statute. But what they are tied to, let me say that back. They're not mandated in statute. They may actually be very well tied to the minimum wage through that contract that union has with the employer, and that very well could be the case. It would make sense, quite frankly. Part of the issue is that we have seen a huge decline in unions as well, and union workers. People are actually out negotiating on their own, saying, look, I'm better than that guy. I should be paid more for the work that I do rather than doing more work and getting paid the same as that guy that's sitting over there in the corner doing nothing. And that's what we've seen in the past. So I would anticipate that it very well could be tied. That may be some of the driving force. Greg, do you have any thoughts on no?
Bonnie, you're right in that, as I mentioned in my talk about 71, Amendment 70 is being funded primarily by out-of-state special interest groups. One of those is the SEIU, Service Employees International Union, and they're the people that represent the low-skilled laborers in the country if they decide to organize and form a union. So they're trying to get a raise for people in their union. So there's that, and really that's one of the other problems we have is these ballot measures are being used as a tool to drive voter turnout, and so a lot of people that want to see Hillary Clinton get elected president are paying to put this particular measure on the ballot. And I couldn't find, all I could find was that there were 66,000 Coloradans who currently work for minimum wage. And I don't know the details of 70, but there's some sort of provision in there that deals with wait staff that is especially onerous to people that operate restaurants. It doesn't take into account how much money wait staff earns through tips and forces the restaurant then to increase those salaries to a tremendous level. So one of the biggest opponents of this, of course, is the Restaurant Association.
Others?
Yes. Good point. Thank you. Questions?
Well, I appreciate the question, Mr. Holtorf, but both of your previous senators would disagree that you are as cheap as you look. We know that you are tight. Yeah, you're exactly right. Anytime you raise, and you know in the cattle feeding business, if the price of your feed goes up, you're going to have more at the end to pay for that feed and provide the profit to pay the employees and everything else for that price of the cattle when they come out of the feedlot. 7-Eleven's the same way. Every store, the grain elevator down here is the same way. The car dealership's the same way. Every single one of those will have to raise their prices to adjust for minimum wage employees. And we will continue to pay that. And when we pay that higher price, and if you're one of those that got that minimum wage increase, it doesn't buy you any more because the prices that you have to pay are now higher. Yeah.
Thank you. One other thing, my family had the opportunity to go to Paris maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Has anybody ever been in a McDonald's in Paris? And what was it like? Now it was not only did they serve funny foods, but everything is automated. There are no people who come up to the counter and say, "May I help you, please?" You enter everything into a little robot. The robot takes the order. It's roboticized in the back, and the reason for that is because in France, the cost of employing entry-level workers is much, much higher than it is here because of various laws like the minimum wage. And one of the things that a low minimum wage does is it gives people who've never worked before the opportunity to get into the workforce, to learn how to show up on time, to learn how to say yes sir even when you don't feel like saying yes sir, and all the things that you got to do when you have a job. And it gives young people the opportunity to move into the workforce. And if those young people are replaced by robots, then they become candidates for the welfare state rather than for the workforce. And I think the minimum wage goes to a lot more deeper issues about what America and what Colorado are about than just cost of business. So thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Yes.
Yeah, to answer your question, for those that didn't hear the question, was that driven by the lack of presidential choice through the caucus system? Yes, it came out of frustration this year. Let me give you a little history on the past presidential primaries. You know, we've been in the caucus system now since the turn of the century, the 20th century. In the last we had three presidential primaries. And obviously, when there was we had a presidential primary and paid for a presidential primary when there was no primary. We had somewhere between 7 and 20% participation. So it's hard to justify, for some of us, it's really hard to justify government dollars being paid for a primary when you have 7 or even go to the high end, the 20% show up to vote in a primary. I don't know what the cost it is to administer that election, but I have heard numbers that it has been over $1 per person in the past. That can be somewhat scary. The estimate is it's $5 million. We have 5 million people in Colorado, or just over 5 million people in Colorado. Of the people that will actually vote, and of that 5 million, there's 70% that are registered to vote, something like that. And if you have 20% of that 70%, you're down to 14%. 14% of 5 million is, help me doing the math, 700,000. That'd be pretty close, 700,000. And $5 million for 700,000, that's just about $6 per voter to administer an election. So the question is, yes, it was driven through frustration. The frustration was on the Republican side that there was no straw poll. And that was generated because of the national party says if you have a straw poll, it's got to be binding. And our people in Colorado said, no, we're going to have a straw poll. We're not going to be bound if our candidate that we select is no longer in the race when you get to the convention, or doesn't seem to be the direction the state needs to go. So our state on the Republican side said, no, we're not going to bind those, so we're not going to take a straw poll. Now, there's a number of precincts that indeed took a straw poll anyhow just to see where they're at, but they weren't very well publicized. On the Democrat side, they had they had people in both camps that wanted to play and wanted to be involved, and they couldn't get in the door. There were a number of places where they were turned away, and a number of places that, quite frankly, they were packed. And then there was concern about, on the Democrat side, on how those votes, you saw many of those videos on how votes were actually taken there. So that was a concern. And yes, it was generated out of frustration. So how do we fix that? That's a good question. Do I think these 2 ballot initiatives are the answer? Absolutely not. Do I think there's compromise here to involve people and figure out how to get people involved in politics and selecting candidates? Yes. I can tell you we have tried that in the legislature, but understand that one side of the aisle has a very different view on how elections should be run than the other side of the aisle. And so with split chambers, which isn't always a bad thing, with Republicans in charge of the Senate and Democrats in charge of the House, oftentimes we don't find those compromises. But I can tell you we'll continue to try and figure out what that looks like. Yeah? How many people are in education here? How many people are on school boards or teachers are in here? And how many dollars did you get from that? The goose egg. Yeah, people were sold a bill of goods. There were a number of us that cautioned about that. It is spent now on capital. The marijuana is going to some education stuff on capital, but if you're in a poor school district that can't afford a mill levy override, you don't get any of that. You got to have matching funds, so it's a challenge. I won't answer. Let me suffice by saying that no, I do not believe it was a good thing for us to do. I think if you talked, this last year I toured, in Senator Brophy and mine, we have 1/4 of all the school districts in the state in our Senate district when we serve in the Senate. Of those school districts, I toured every single one that would have me. There were 3 that didn't want me to come to the school for some reason, but all but 3, and I visited with them. And those down by Burlington and along the edge, where people moved into the state just for marijuana, and now they're babysitting kids and have bigger issues in kids, I think it has had a huger effect than anybody could have anticipated. So, yes, there has been talk of repealing it. I'm happy to help. I believe it was constitutional, wasn't it? I believe it was put in the Constitution.
We've been talking all afternoon. It's so hard to get out. This is an example, though, guys. I think when the marijuana thing came out, there wasn't enough citizens to react or understand. Just why, and so we got this thing on our ballot. We never dreamed it would pass. I think we're, it's just like I'm so glad to see you guys here today, but there should be twice as many, because I don't think people understand it. I'm going back to '69 because we have some people on the other side that want to say one thing. I was in Port Aransas a few years ago, and there were a bunch of Canadians there that had a single payer. And they had come to the United States because they said, thank gosh, we can see a doctor. Don't ever change your health care. We have health care in Canada where we needed knee replacements. And we were going to have to wait a year or longer. So we're here. The other thing in Canada, the doctors get a fee, pay $150,000, that's it. Now, I'm going to go back to my doctor daughter here. She has a clinic. She's employed a number of people. Would you care to elaborate what would happen to you if you got paid a salary over a capital, what do I want to say, a business that you employ 5, 6 employees? And you provide for them at $150,000 salary? Are you going to be able to keep up with what you're doing?
What they said, it's going to drive more people have to see, like, what they said, 150 pages. You just have to see more volume. I don't know. I think no one knows. I don't think that would be, for small businesses for sure, it would be a detriment. But I think that the biggest concern that I have, which I would agree with Frank, is the big unknowns.
One of the things that's likely to come is what's called capitation. And capitation is when Colorado Care would pay the healthcare provider a per year fee to take care of, say, you, Bunny. And what that does is it gives the provider an incentive not to, the only way they make money is to not spend money treating you because it's a fixed flat fee per year. And so what they do is a capitation system is the way the government can throw the kind of the blame for not being treated onto the providers, even though it's a financial decision that's forced by the government. So watch, if Colorado Care passes, watch for capitation. I think that is one of the very high probabilities that this 15-member interim board will come up with, because that's very high on the priority of the medical left, if you would. So.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy?
Sorry, I got passed on the discussion there. I wanted to just throw something in on the open primary questions on the ballot. Wanted to give you a little bit of background just for a moment as well, because Senator Sonnenberg mentioned the canceling of the straw poll. And I also serve on the executive committee for the state Republican Party. So I was one of the 26 people that voted to cancel that straw poll. And I had a lot of people with some very strong opinions about that straw poll. And I wanted to make sure that everybody knew why we do that, why that happened. And the reason why the straw poll got canceled, and Senator Sonnenberg said this right. He said that those would have become bound results. And the reason why that is important is, how many people in here are precinct committee people for your party? Had we had a binding straw poll, if you were a precinct committee person, that would have made you an election judge. That meant you would have been responsible for those results. And all of those bound votes that would have been cast would have been on you. And the potential for fraud in that, anything that could have happened would have been on you for properly counting those votes. And I wasn't willing to force that onto all the people of my county. So that's the reason why we canceled the straw poll. To the bigger picture of the open primary system, all of us who've been involved, especially I'll use precinct committee people, those people who've been county officers, we're part of a volunteer private organization. None of us are getting paid to be here, to be involved, to do the work that we do. And so we have chosen to dedicate our time and our resources and all of our efforts to a specific team. And as we have made that effort, when I look at the potential of an open primary system and a person who has chosen not to pick a team, to me that seems unfair for us who have made all this effort to have to build our party, to build our candidate, to develop our candidates that carry our name of our organization, and then allow people who aren't part of our team to pick the captains of our team. So if we are part of an organization, this is why I advocate that we continue to have this closed primary system. So we can talk about the presidential primary, and that 107 is, we can have all kinds of great discussions about whether or not we should continue with the caucus system and go through the assembly. But as far as an open primary system, if you're a member of a party, should people who aren't members of your organization be allowed to vote? If you're part of a corporation, should people who aren't shareholders in your organization, should they be allowed to vote to pick your officers? That's why I stand against the 108. So that's just my 2 cents worth. So thank you.
Any other questions? So I want to remind you again that Stormy Productions is videotaping this, and you can view it on YouTube at forum.stormyproductions.tv. At this time, I'd like to ask Pastor Scott Beaker to come and give us a closing prayer, and he has a few comments also.
Do I have some comments?
Yes, you
do. I've been asked to just remind everybody that there are, if you try to gather money up, you want to talk to politicians or pastors, and there are some contribution containers back there because it costs money to rent facilities and to fund information, and so any contribution that you can leave would be greatly appreciated. The second is to let everybody know that our Patriot Study Group, where many of these issues are discussed, and this was actually planned, is at St. Joseph's Catholic Church here in Akron at 9:15 on Thursday mornings, and we invite all who can to attend and share ideas, thoughts, things that we are all facing. And one of the big focuses is that many of us believe that this country no longer follows the principles that this country was founded on. And these are things that are important to all of us. The Founding Fathers had a vision and they had a plan when this country was founded. And many of us believe that this country has strayed from those principles. And so I invite all who can to come and share all thoughts and support, or whatever you can bring to the group is greatly appreciated. So with that, let us close with prayer. Good and gracious Heavenly Father, you have blessed this nation in many ways with freedom, liberty, and resources. Help us in faith to turn this nation from the error of its ways and once again seek your face. In the name of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ, whom we live and pray. Amen.
Thank you. And one last round of applause for the people that are up here on the stage and spoke to us this afternoon, and thanks for coming again.